Hello, you're welcome to Prep with Chigozie, and on this segment we're going to be discussing the listening section of the IELTS. Now, for starters, right, you have to know if you've been taking tests already or you have taken the actual test previously. I'm sure you're familiar by now that the test is a 30-minute test, and of course it is a spontaneous listening and writing down process. So you would be required to listen to a range of recordings. We are talking about a conversation between two persons, or just a lecture, somebody giving a speech, which could be around the tour of a museum or the tour of a facility, or you could be listening to a discussion, which of course involves more than two persons, and you'll be required to write down certain information, not necessarily writing everything you hear. Certainly that is almost impossible, but then you'll be required to take down information pertaining to the question. So the question will be showing on the interface of your system, and you'll be required to just write down certain things based on what you hear. Now, it is important to note at this point that you are required to pay attention to certain things, right? As not every information you hear is essential, but then you want to ensure that you don't get distracted. Now, I'm going to be taking you through 5 things you should know to help you excel at this test. However, if you've been struggling with the question on the listening so far, and you think that your issue could be around your inability to hear the accent clearly, there are other approaches that could work for that. Probably that's when we'll be talking about listening to more conversations from British American speakers, or just British speakers through movies or news channels, right? So you may need to listen for a very, very long period of time to conversations in that accent to get familiar with it. However, if you're already familiar with the accent, this video is particularly for you. Yes, you're familiar with the accent already, but then you struggle with picking up the vital information, the necessary parts, right? This is for you. Now, first thing first, you would often be given a time to look at a range of questions before the recording pertaining to that question begins. For example, the question we have displaying on my screen right now, the instruction says no more than one word and or a number. So it means your answer can either be a number and a word, or just a word, right? In other words, say the answer, for example, is 100. It means you would have to, you could either write 100 in figures, or you spell 100 in words. Either ways, you would be correct. That is on the instruction part. Now, how do you fill up these blanks? First, you'll be given time to look through the question, like I mentioned earlier. This is what I consider the most vital part of the test. Remember, you get to listen to the recording just once. So the recording does not play more than once. And while you're taking your practice, it is important to act like that. It's important to only listen once. Maybe by the time you're done answering all 40 questions, you could replay and listen again for the information you didn't get the previous time, right? But then, during practice, I often recommend master listening once. Don't make it a habit to pause the recording or replay any segment of the recording at all. That puts you in the right atmosphere for the actual test. Yes. So what do you do with the time you're given to look through the questions first? One thing. Yes, you're required to do just one thing, which is memorizing all the keywords and making some predictions out of them. For instance, you're already given an example here, and the question says number of items for sale. So it means on the recording, the seller or the attendant must have mentioned that they have 3 items for sale. Hence, your answer is 3. On the other hand, the answer could also be just 3 in figures, right? But yes, so what do you do with this time now? As I have the questions from 1 to 5, often from the beginning of the test, you'll be required to look at shorter range of questions, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, sometimes even 1 to 3, right? And it's until the very end that you have to listen to, that you have to read 10 questions at a stretch, which is not advisable that you do all 10 questions at a stretch right away, but then you're going to learn that as you progress through this recording. Now, how do you do this? Try to use the information provided for you to expect what is coming next. So notice that the answer provided for construction, you have a colon and of course wood. So I suppose at this point that the question being asked is regarding the material for construction, hence we have wood. So it means because we have a colon after the word color, after the word drawers, after the word height, you'll be required to write down information pertaining to those nouns. Now, in terms of color, you can easily predict at this point what you're required to write. So your answer could either be black, white, yellow, depending on the color that you hear. So looking at this already, I've been able to make some expectations as to what my answer for the first question should be. The second question, we have drawers. So we have 2 in each drawer. So 2 drawers in each table. Handles made of. Notice the word choices used. Handles made of. So it means I am required to write down the material used in making the handles, which could be steel, it could be plastic, it could also be wood. So you see, I just made expectations based on, and I have height. Height also is how tall the furniture, I guess, is. So you know you're required to write down number. It can be 10, 20 centimeters, and because you're already given centimeters, you may not need to write centimeters anymore. You're required to just write the figure, and you may not need to bother about spelling, as that will take so long before the next information is mentioned. Condition, you could think it has to do with the state of the material, the state of the furniture. Is it good? Is it perfect? Is it not so good? I'm expecting that. Price, and see, in brackets we have for both. In other words, if you hear the price for one item, that may not necessarily be your answer. The price, you have to wait till you hear the price for both. Although sometimes I encourage my students to write down the first price they hear, in case the first price they hear happens to be the price for both items. Now, a quick run through what I simply did right now. I took note of the keywords before the blank and I made some predictions. Secondly, expect that the words given to you on the question will not necessarily be the exact words mentioned in the actual recording. So color could be rephrased to appearance. Expect anything that has to do with color, but not necessarily the word color. But then for the beginning, you would often have them mention the exact words anyway. Drawers, I think that could be maintained. Handles are constructed with. You may not have handles made of. Expect handles constructed with, or handles are made from so and so materials. Height, it could be how tall the material is. Condition, the state of the material, the state of the furniture. In this case, it looks like a furniture because I can see certain word that points to that. Drawers, wood, for example. Price, expect amount. So you see, 2 major tips. Firstly, note the keywords, right, and make some predictions within the time you have to look at the word. That's not time for you to start thinking about your family issues or allow your mind derail at all. No. Study the keywords and make some predictions, and of course expect that the keywords could also be rephrased. The third tip, always read the instructions. Notice that before I started looking through this question, I mastered the instruction, which is no more than one word and or a number. A lot of students forget to do this, and often they write 2 words when the question asks for 1 word. In such instance, you would miss the question. So always read the instruction to be sure. Are you required to write 1 word? Are you required to write 2 words? Are you required to write 3 words? The fourth tip, also very important tip, don't get carried away with spellings at the time you're listening to the recording. Yes, don't be overwhelmed by spelling of words. Use shorthands. You could spell your words in brief, in shorthands, and then because you would often be given about 30 seconds to look through all you have written at the end of each section of the recording, you could use that time to fix your spellings. Now, this is why it is important to not get overwhelmed with spellings. This is it. Because you could be so carried away trying to spell a word that you miss when the next answer is mentioned. Yes, so if you could spell as fast as you can, perfect. But then, if you heard the word clearly, write it down in abbreviation or however the spelling comes to you. Don't try to fix it at the moment. If you heard the word single material, for example, you can write SINGL material MATERI. Certainly when you're looking through the answers you have written, when you're given the time to do that, you can then spell your words completely. Yes, and often you would be given information that is not necessary to fill up a blank within a certain time. For example, after mentioning the answer for color, they could say other things that is not drawers, which brings us to the fifth tip. Always be in the mood to write down something whilst you are memorizing the words for the next question. So once you write the color, once it is mentioned that you write down the color, black, white, whatever, and they keep saying other things. So maybe the attendant is asking for the potential buyer's nationality, address. We don't need nationality, we don't need address. What we need is drawers. So keep reading that over and over, especially the part before the blank. Handles made of. Keep memorizing this in your head while listening at the same time. And because it is a time-based test, you don't want to waste any time at all. So once you have written the answer for color, for example, in this case, move your cursor to the next blank you have to fill. Don't wait until you hear the answer. Move your cursor almost immediately to the next blank you have to fill and be in the mood to write down an answer. Yes, so those are the 5 essential tips you have to master. You have to do this over and over, and like I mentioned, always practice under timed conditions. Don't make it a habit to pause or replay any section of the recording at all. However, at the end of the recording, you could replay everything from the beginning and of course get to hear the things you didn't hear quite clearly the previous time. And I only listening with the intention to learn, right? Because you never can tell where the next vital information is going to be mentioned. So don't be a passive listener on the test. And of course, I mentioned it from the beginning of this recording that for those who are probably struggling with understanding the accents, what you want to start doing at this point is listening to as many recordings as you can, listening to news channels, watching movies, and preferably movies that come with transcriptions, because that way you get to see the actual spellings of certain words pronounced in the particular accent which you're going to be listening to on the actual day of the test. So I hope this is pretty helpful, and trust me, I'm going to come again on this section on the listening to walk through questions so that you really see how this is done in real time. Until then, practicing, keep listening, and I wish you the best in your test.